8 Phoenician Barat or It Brit, author of Newton stone inscriptions disclosed as historical original of It Part Olon, king of the Scots, and traditional first Civiazar of Ireland about 400 BC. Disclosing Hishio-Famisian origin of clan title Ualana or Velatension, us, or Wallen of Britain King Cassi Valon of Cadwallon and of Uchlani title of the ruling Cassi Britons. The Scots arrived in Ireland from Spain. The first that came was Pertholomus Part Olon, Niniltal's History of the Britons, 13. Of Gilioan, son of the Lkr, of Orc clan Rol took possession of the islands Orkney that is the son of Parta. Went and took possession of the north of the island of Breton. Books of Lecan and Balimote. Or patronymic title of Priat or Peanut used by this the Phoenician Barat author of the Newton stone inscriptions. Taken in conjunction with his clan title of Gya Aloni Giol now seen to be the Gilioan clan title of the Irish Scot histories above cited, and a name which drops in Britain, Gaelic, and Welsh its initial Gi, becoming Olon or leads us to the discovery of the historical identity of that king. With far-reaching effects upon the prehistory of the Britons and the hitherto unknown sources of their British civilization. And it at the same time rehabilitates and establishes still further the historicity of Wallen. In the Irish sect originals of Ninius, Ninians, Latin history the original form of the name is Part Olon. In SCP. 23. The text gives Gilioan. Pages 33, etc., often transcribed Gliwan. 6. 68 ph and LTENICIAN Origin of Britons and Scots. The early British chronicles and the traditional history books of the Irish Scots, as cited in the heading, and in more detail below. The juxtaposition of these two titles of the Phoenician Barat calling himself or namely or an Ikrikar, Prat Prwt coupled with the fact that the second inscription Gioln, was in the Ogham, the especial sacred script of the Irish Scots, suggested to me that the author was the actual historical original of King of the Scots and son of Part Olon, who, according to the ancient British and Rol Parthai, Irish histories, arrived from the Mediterranean by way of Spain about in the Orkneys, and who first colonized 400 BC and civilized Ireland. Further examination fully confirmed and established this identity. But before examining this evidence, his clan title of Gya Aloni, or as it is written in the Oghamgian, first requires some notice. This name Gya Aloni or Gioln is clearly the clan name or of the Irish Scot histories, to which belonged the first traditional king of the Scots in Ireland, Part Olon, and the clan which colonized North Britain in the prehistoric period. As cited in the heading, and also repeatedly referred to in the Irish traditional books. In the following further reference from these books we seem to have a memory of Part Olon's temporary location in Spain in the name which appears to be the Iethirasi Agadir name of the ancient Phoenician city port of Gades, the Modem Cadiz, outside the Pillars of Hercules. And also a memory of his remoter port of Tarsus, the ancient or port of Tarts Tarsi Cilicia, in the of this record. Of in the same year came to Erin from the land Traea Tarsi. The clan Gilioan. Icathirasi Agadirs was their name, that is son of Part Olain. That title also is seen to be obviously the original of the second half of the title of applied by Catiuni, Ptolemy, the Greek geographer of early Britain topography. 1 Book of Lecan pound 01. 286, and SCP. 30, and 323. CMD, 315. 4 Note. Detailed. Newton stone by King Part Olon 6 grams. Initial G to the ruling tribe of Britons who occupied the home province of the paramount king of the Britons in Cassar's day, namely Cassi Ulanus or Cassi Velanus, which extended from the Thames to the Wash and Humber, see later. And it is also seen to occur in its shortened form by dropping the in the name of that king himself, as Cassi Ulan, the Cadwallon of the Cymry. This identity is seen in the equation. Newton stone Irish Scot Ptolemy books Roman Cymric Gya Aloni equals Gilioan equals Uchlani equals Uau at I equals Wallen Aoi or Gliwan. or the origin and meaning of that clan title now proved to be Hittite. The word Ilanu is defined in Babylonian as the Hittite, and Gt whilst Altainu is an oak, and Kilani or Zilani is defined as a kati for a corridor and porticoed windowed building or palace, and it was especially used for Hittite buildings in Cilicia, too, and was imitated by the Babylonians. This Kilani is obviously cognate with the Akkadian Kolanu Solanu. Wooden, which thus discloses the Hittite or Akkadian origin of the Greek word for wood exulon and also of the English Yule, which significantly is spelt in Gothic, Dul or 01, and in Early English and Anglo-Saxon Ili or Giola, which also illustrate the dropping out of the initial G in the later word. It thus presumably designated originally the wooden character of these corridors and porticoed palaces of the Hittites, and latterly was applied to the builders themselves. The Phoenician branch of the Hittites were famous for their superior woodcraft as well as their masonry buildings. Thus Solomon says to the Phoenician king of Tyre, "Thou knowest that there is not among us Israelites any that can skill to hew timber like unto the Sidonians Phoenicians. S. Xylon. 31, also name of Cassis, IB8S. In the 6th campaign of M.D.315. Latter says ICPN thus. They, or Sennacherib they, I8:1, that erected a building like a palace 01 the Kati land, which is called in Hitung of the Muru, or Amorite section of Hittites, Kilani Zilani. MD, 315. CSED under Yule, I Kings 5, 6. 6g. 70th Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. It thus appears that the Kilani timber palaces of the Hittites with their porticoed windows and corridors were of the Gothic type, which is essentially a wooden style of architecture. Especially as we shall find that the Hittite or Kati or Gudi were the primitive Goths. The Gothic style of architecture is nowadays supposed to have arisen no earlier than in the 12th century of the Christian era. But I long ago showed that it was used by the Indo-Scythians or Indo-Goths or Kati, in the 2nd century Geta, i.e., AD, in their sculptured representations of temples of India. And this identity of the Hittites with the Goths now also explains the occurrence of the Gothoid arch in several ancient buildings of the Hittites in their old capital at Bakaskoy in Cappadocia, dating back to at least about 1500 BC. As a clan title, this wooden palace builder's title is found in Herodotus as Gelonus, the son of Hercules the Phoenician and Gelon, a contemporary king of Syracuse, a Phoenician settlement. It was probably used to distinguish culturally the manorial palace-dwelling Hittite overlords as the hall-dwelling aristocracy from the lowly aborigines who lived mostly in caves or underground abodes, such as Picts' houses. This wooden palace origin for it appears probable also from the tribal title of mentioned Geloni, by Herodotus. For a colony of fur-trading merchants in the Don Valley of Scythia or Gothland, see map, whose city 3 was built entirely of wood, with lofty walls and temples, and, like the Phoenicians and early Britons, they were worshippers of the corn spirit Dionysus, see later, and they came from the trading ports of Greece, suggesting Phoenician ancestry. As the Phoenicians were the chief traders in the ports of ancient Greece. In the form of Kiluni we actually find it used as a personal name amongst the Cassis of Babylonia, with the variant of 1. See official reports of my deputation to Kalit. Griot Buddhist. From Swat Valley for Imperial Museum. Calcutta in 1895. And Sculptures La Waddell. Griot Buddhist sculptures from Swat Valley in Trans. In Tetnat. O.Intel Congress, Paris, 1897. Sector 1.245. Etc. When Thep photographs of these early Gothic arches were demonstrated by me. Herodotus. 410, 3. 3 pounds 4. 108, 109. 4 pounds 4. Log. Gian title and Britain Wallen 7i. F. Gillian. This clan title was also used by the Britons of Brittany in its ancient phone of ff2, as well as by the Gwyllen, Cymru for one of their chief seaports, in modern Kidwelly, which, the British chronicles tell us, was an ancient port of the Scots or Seti2.e. Caddy.ngt and dropping its initial G, like the in Setgwilly becoming Gwillywelly, to phone Ualan. It was the royal clan title of the paramount Briton king of the Caddy and Cassie of Britain. Cassie Ualan or Cadwallon, and also the ruling Briton for clan title throughout a great part of Britain. One of the latter inscriptions, with the variant of FF Caddiuchlani, is of a special interest here. It records the early Scottish clan title of FF Catulana upon a monument of the Barat 2nd or 3rd century near the south end of the 5 AD, Roman wall at South Shields on Tyne. This fine artistic monument of a Briton lady, see Fig P73, as its I9 inscription tells us, was erected significantly by a Syrian from the ancient Phoenician city of Palmyra, on the old trade route from Tyre and Beirut to Mesopotamia. A city possessing a famous temple to the Phoenician sun god Bel, with a colonnade nearly a mile long. Its dedicator calls himself Theron FF Barats, and records that he married a lady of the FF Catulana clan, whose death he mourns with the single pathetic word alas. Incidentally, this monument is of great historical importance in showing 1 CPN 77 and so. 2. Cadgwyllen occurs in the ancient Breton Chartulary of the Abbey, our Maclagan our ancestors, 332. Of Beaufort NAB, 14, Giles 00. 389 Eulalius occurs in an inscription at Caerleon, the ancient Briton capital at Monmouth, see of Puslum scrip, Latin. Berlin, 7, no. 126. Clan title of a Briton lady in inscription of about 2nd the Ka-Ulanaz century at South Shields, Ephemephis Epigraphica 4, p. 212, no 718a. Similarly, Setiloin as royal clan title in an inscription about 4th of century at Yarrow in Selkirkshire. Catulani occurs as name of tribe on monument of about 3rd at Castlesteads, Cumberland. Century CB, 3, 456. Ulani was a clan of Alpine people, see of Pus inscript. La/in. 5, no. 7817, 45, and Ulanus, a man's name or title in ancient Spain, IB3, number 1589, 1590, where Catania is the name of an old province of the Phoenicians there. For details of this monument, see Northumberland Archaeolog. So C.S. Ephemeris in previous note. I have personally examined this fine sculpture more than once in company with my old friend Dr. J.A.S. Drummond, formerly resident there, and to whom I am indebted for fine photos of the monument and its inscriptions by Miss Flagg. 72 Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. That a Barat merchant from Syria Phoenicia had come to Britain in the 2nd or 3rd century in AD, with a Barat or Briton kinswoman of the Catulana or Cathayuan royal clan. This Catulana clan also existed in the Selkirk district of Scotland about the 5th century at Yarrow stands AD. A funereal monolith with a rustic Latin inscription of about the 5th century dedicated to the memory of a chieftain AD. Ediloin clan a monument which I and taken a squeeze impression of its one inscription. Of the local tradition also of this Gya Aloni or Gion clan title seems significantly to have survived in the Newton stone in Dam. The name Clions of an embankment near the Don to the south of the Mount Benechia, see map, p19, and in the adjoining Cluny, or anciently or castle in the neighborhood. Clony Cluin, and in the latter usage it seems noteworthy that the epithet is parallel to the use of Kilani to denote a Hittite III palace. The dropping out of the initial guttural gi is a not uncommon dialectic change, thus it is seen in this actual wordosh Setgwilly becoming the modern Kidwelly, similarly Gwyllia becomes Wales. Gwyt or Guth, the other name for the Isle of Wight even in Alfred's day, becomes White, and William is the remains of an earlier Guillielm or Guillaume. and Catyiuchlani became Catwallon, or Cadwallon. Thus of our Priatgian with the meaning of Prat the Lord, for became dialectically and be the meaning of Part Olon. Gian what it may, the fact nevertheless is clearly established that is the source of the later form of Pratgian Part Olon. Craig of 1 the first lines read High Memorial Seti Loin, FOL 10WED by what Mr. Brown reads as Enig vi Princip et Nudidum no Gen, etc. A cast this monument is in the museum at Hawick. This name has been supposed to be derived from the Welsh glan, or side, but, apart from the anomaly of a Welsh name in this locality, brink its use here as Clion's Dam presumes a human sense. A similarly is found in France for the famous Cluny galleried monastic of that name. Palace in Irish Scottish. Clan equals champion, hero, in the Book of Lecan, CCAN, 341. Fig. I9 Britain Lady of Cathualon clan, wife of Birates, a Syro-Phoenician. Of about n century AD in, from sculpture South Shields. I reproduced by permission of publishers of Handbook to Roman Wall. 74 Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. Thus the Barat author of our Newton stone inscription is revealed as the historical original of the traditional Part Olon, the first king of the Scots, who arrived from the Mediterranean via Spain about 400 DE and introduced civilization into Ireland, and whose clan colonized and civilized North Britain, as cited in the heading. Phoenician. The detailed account of King Partolon's arrival in Ireland, as preserved in the traditional histories of the of which is thus established now becomes of great historical interest and importance, and especially the record of his relations with the north of Britain and Don Valley. At the outset it is to be noted that in the Latin versions of the ancient British chronicles by the Romish monks Ninius, or Ninian, and Geoffrey, the it occurs in the Irish-Scot vernacular histories, is Latinized into Partholomus in order to adapt it to the New Testament apostolic name of Bartholomew. The account of Partolon's arrival in Ireland is Ninius in his History of the Britons written about BO AD. Long after this, the arrival of the Picts, the Scoi arrived in Erin from the coast of Spain. The first that came was Partholomus, with the Thou-on followers, men and women. But, a plague came immediately upon them. They all perished in 1 week. Famous the statement here that he arrived from Spain is of great significance, as further evidence of his being an Aryan Phoenician, coming, like Brute, by way presumably of the seaport of Gades, the Modum Cades, or House of the Gads, or Phoenicians, Gad being, as we shall see, an especial variant of Cadi used by the Phoenicians, and coined upon the tribal title of Cot or Zat, i.e. Scot, and he is called in the chronicles a Scot. He is also reported by Geoffrey to have come from Spain, see later. Phoenician. The traditional place of his landing in Ireland is stated in the Ogham Book of Ballymote II to have been seen in the Bay of Kenmare in Kerry County, and that place and NAB, 13. Dates to about the 10th century in its present recension. AD. Part Olon in Scotland and Ireland 75. District is significantly the chief seat of the Ogham inscribed monuments in the British Isles and GT the old saga says. They landed from their safe barks, in the clear blue port of the fair land, in the Bay of Bright Shields of Scene. The devastating Phi plague above referred to was possibly the hostile attack of the aboriginal race in Erin called Fomori, who, the Irish chronicles tell us, attacked Part Olon and his party, but were defeated by him in a great battle, though Geoffrey's chronicles, on the other hand, state that his descendants continued to live in and colonize ultimately the whole of Erin. And the Irish chronicles refer to these descendants of his sons there in later times. But his inscription in Aberdeenshire now shows that he himself eventually left Kerry for the north, a spirit of adventure for fresh worlds to conquer, leaving, according to tradition, 2 sons settled in Fort Kerry. Some details of Partolon's voyage from Spain via Ireland to the north of Scotland are preserved in Geoffrey's traditional chronicles. but these appear to confuse his emigration northwards to Aberdeen with his settlement on the Irish coast of Kerry. Geoffrey records that Part Olán arrived in Ireland during the reign of the Briton king named Gurgeant, who, about 407 succeeded his father BC, King Belinus. The 22nd in direct succession from Brutus, see Appendix I, and who ruled nominally the whole of Britain from Cornwall to Caithness, with his chief capitals as Osc, or Caerleon, on the Usk, and Trinovantum, latterly London, on the Thames. He also inherited from his father the province of Phi Dacia, which, from obviously in Denmark, and not the Dacia of the I. Of the 193 Ogham inscribed monuments in Ireland, 92 are in Kerry, in the district of Seine. In that county are 46, BOI, 378. And 2 Book of Ballymote, trans. By Dr. Connellan, F12, and compare 67. Seine is spelt in ancient texts Skene, obviously Khij, cognate to. The crowning place of the ancient Scot kings near Scone. Perth. 3 RHL, 589. O Irish. Chronicles call these sons Slange and Rudraig, Roderick, GC, 3. 5K.H.J62. 76 Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots Danube Valley, and he was returning thence through the Orkneys with his fleet when he met Part Olán there with his fleet. Geoffrey records, at that time Gurgeant was passing through the Orkney Islands, he found 30 ships full of men and women. And upon his inquiry of them the reason of their coming thither, their duke named approached him in a respectful part hollow and submissive manner, and desired pardon and peace. Telling him that he and was sailing round had been driven out of Spain, those seas in quest of a habitation. He also desired some small to dwell in, that they might put an end to their part of Britain tedious wanderings, for it was now a year and a half since he and his company had been out at sea. When Gurgeant Brabtruk understood that they had come from Spain, and were called, he granted their petition, and Barclenses, sent men with them to, and assigned it to them. There they grew up Ireland, and increased in number, and have possessed that island to this very day. This Orkney location for Part Olán and his fleet whilst on their voyage from Spain appears to be a reference to his sea passage from his colony in Kerry to the Garrioch Vale of the Don of Aberdeen, the site of his monument in question. That portion of the narrative which describes him as returning from the Orkneys to Kerry is presumably by later Irish copyists and translators of these ancient chronicles before Geoffrey's time. Having substituted 11. Chiaraic to or Kerry of Ireland, where Part Olán had, according to the tradition, we have seen, established an Irish colony, for Garrioch, the district of our Newton monument in the northeast of Scotland and not very far distant by sea from the Orkneys. Geoffrey expressly states that Part Olán desired some small part of Britain, not Ireland, though Ireland is mentioned later adapted to the Irish-Scot tradition. And the relatively short stay of Part Olán in Kerry and his sudden disappearance from there, ascribed conveniently to plague, would be thus accounted for, as well as his permanent colonization of the south of Ireland by the 2 sons left there. Indeed, I find that positive, more or less contemporary, 1 GC 3. 2 This is 12. The Irish form of the name Kerry, BOI. 16. Catti in Orkney, Shetland, and inscriptional evidence for the presence of the early Catti or Catti with their Cassie sun cross, in the region of the Orkneys, actually exists to confirm the historicity of this tradition of the visit of the early Catti to the Orkney Islands, or they at Lunesting on the mainland of Shetland, or land of the which name, as we shall find, is a softened variant of or Hittite. And the settee of early Scot monuments, is a pre-Christian cross monument bearing an Ogham inscription and on its top a large engraved sun cross of type, see later. This inscription also has proved such a puzzle to Celtic experts, who have variously deemed it to be Celtic, Gaelic, Welsh, etc., that the Celtic scholar, Dr. A. McBain, petulantly declares that it is neither Welsh one nor any other language. It reads, however, I find, without difficulty in a dialect of the Gothic of the Eddas, see text in footnote. And with strict literalness in translating the Gothic words reads as follows: Spitz, Cot, Cassie. This, cross at Zatui Cuh, city, of the Zat, or Cat. Point 3, this, cross, is erected by, Zaitmanen, son of, Hecfef, who, rests aneath Sweening in Hope Nigh 6. IWF Skene, Highlands of Scotland, 1902, 398. 2. It is published by BOI, 365, pi. 49, and he and a written compare Suthisk PSAS, whose transliteration of the Ogham differs but little from mine, 1884,201/. And in particular renders the critical names in question Zoutli Cuh. Ats Ahu respectively, transliterating the same sign X, in the two latter instances. On the other hand, when loosely as A. Drive W. Bannerman, PSAS. 1908, 343f, reads the inscription in reverse direction or upside down. My transliteration of this Lunasting inscription into Roman letters is as follows: the inherent short A of the consonants being expressed in small type and the other letters in capitals. Plus or minus H and XATTUICUHXATTS, on NAXAHHTT Manon, HACC Fef, NEDT. S of the final S in the text XATTS is the genitive not only in Gothic but in Hito-Sumerian and Cassie, and it thus corresponds to possessive affix the English language. Now disclosed to be derived from the British Gothic. On the cub affix, see subsequent the Hito-Sumerian through text. The Gothic of the text is the literal equivalent of the English neath, nedr, the Scandinavian nad, rest, neath, beneath, ned edic, compare YD 448, 450, and is, I find, derived from the Sumerian and Cassie nad lie down, resting place. Compare BBW 11, 203, which is thus to be the remote Hito-Sumerian source of the Scottish nod. Disclosed in English neath and nether. 5. The on of the text is the edic on 4. Von, 1 or van, the English ween end. Fein and yearn and is usually translated by Scandinavians as meaning hope, CPVD, 472, 684-5. It appears to be derived from the Sumerian nu to plan, heart, secret, CPBBW 2, 14, and PSL 192. The final NA of the text seems the edic NA or NI. CPVD, 447. 78. Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. The term CUH for town or city, for this old town of the Catty or Zatti in Shetland, where this Cassie cross monument is recorded as having been erected, is of especial Hittite significance. It is now disclosed as being obviously the equivalent of the common modern name Khoi for a town throughout the old land of the Hittites in Asia Minor. Thus, the old chief capital of the Hittites in Cappadocia is still called Bethos Khoi or Bethos town. It also seems to me to be the Hittite origin of the common modern term for town or village in Indo-Persia, namely the nasalized Ga, N, W. It also seems to be the Hittite origin presumably of the affix Cu, Go, Gau of place names in several of the older centres of civilization in Scotland, such as Glasgow, the old spelling of Glasgow and thus giving the meaning of town of the Gaels, Cadcu or town of the Cads, or Phoenicians. The old documentary spelling of Cadso, the original name for Hamilton, residence of the Premier Duke in Scotland, on the Clyde, with its old pre-Christian cross, see Fig. In Chapter 19, Largo on the Fife Coast, with its cave deposits of prehistoric men, standing stones and pre-Christian cross monuments. Linlithgow, an ancient residence of the kings in Scotland, and so on. Or called further evidence for the presence of early Catty in the Orkney region is forthcoming from the district names on the adjoining mainland. Thus Caithness, the or knows, of the land, of the Caiths or Kata, a people who are now disclosed to be the Catty or Catty, or Hittites. And the contiguous Sutherland was, up till the Norse period of about the 9th century IAD, or Land of the Cats, that is, the Catti or Hittites. And the Duke of Sutherland is still called locally Dihook Cat or Duke of the Cats, i.e., Catti. Caitiff. Moreover, the tribal title given to Part Olon by Geoffrey above noted, as of the Barclenses, confirms still further his identity with the Phoenician author of our Newton stone inscription. This prefix bar is obviously the early contracted form of Barat, which was written by the Sumer Phoenicians simply as Bara. And Clenses is obviously a Latinized form of our Phoenicians Gyalomi or Gian, the Uchlani title of the Cassi tribe of Catti, which, we have already seen, represents apparently the Hittite C.P. Mackay's commentary on Ptolemy's Geography of Scotland in 1908, 80. PSAS. Part Olon's Phoenician titles 79. Title of Kiliani, in a term which was especially current in Cilicia, one whence our author tells us in his inscription, he came. And we thus see why the Briton Catti king, with lineage directly continuous from the first Briton king Brut, see Appendix I, and living in the more highly civilized part of Britain in the south, with only nominal rule north of the Forth, according to the chronicles, should have befriended his fellow clansman Part Olon in extending Hitto-Phoenician civilization and colonization in this remoter part of Britain. When he learned that he was of the Barclenses, for this was the same Catti or Hittite clan to which that early Briton king himself belonged. The further title given to Part Olon of son of Sira or Sru in the Irish chronicles is a striking confirmation of his Hitto-Phoenician ancestry. This ancestral name Sira or Sru obviously preserves the patronymic King Barat's front title of and Lt Sar, which was the favorite form of the ancestral Barat's name selected by the founder of the first Phoenician dynasty in Mesopotamia, who regularly called himself son, or descendant, of Sar. It thus attests the remarkable authenticity of the tradition of the Irish Scots, whilst further confirming the of Part Olon, who is now revealed on the solid basis of concrete history as the only of Ireland, but of the north of Scotland. About 400 years before the dawn of the Christian era, the migration of Part Olon from Cilicia to the British Isles about according to the British Chronicle 390 BC, historical tradition, see Appendix I, was probably owing to the massacring invasion and annexation of Cilicia and Asia Minor by the Spartan Greeks in 399. These Spartan BC invaders were significantly opposed by the Phoenician fleet in 394 but not finally defeated by the Phoenicians at B.C1M.D. Book of 315. Leinster, Book of Dun, I5a, 234. Etc. Part Olon Max Dame Miexurum Miexru, Seekin 229. For reading Sira CRHL, 580/302 Rolls ed. 5. p. 140, calls him in Goildus Topographia Hibernica, Diet. Sir Filius Disturbia Fei Filii no proofs in my Arian of the detailed origin Phoenicians. 80 Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. C. till 387, see Appendix I. And the escape BC 390, and Part Olon is recorded to have BC been driven out of his country, occurring in this interval of the occupation of Cilicia by the Spartan enemies of the Phoenicians is significant, and is in keeping with the record in the British Chronicle, which is thus confirmed by the positive facts of known contemporary history of Part Olon's homeland in eastern Asia Minor at that period. 9. Local survival of Part Olon's name in the district of his monument disclosing Phoenician origin of names Barthol, Battle, and Bartholomew, and Bruid. Title of Kings of the Picts. The local survival of the name of this Brito-Phoenician Part Olon in several parts of the district of his monument at Newton confirms still further the decipherment of his name on his monument, as well as the ancient, though of his name in the history of civilization in northern Scotland. Whilst there is Wardle and Ward Hill a few miles to the east of Part Olon's monument, W and B being dialectically interchangeable, as we have seen. And Burdi is the name of the parish a few miles down in the Don Valley below the Stone, on the way to the sea. What seems more significant is the ancient hamlet bearing the name of Bartle or Barthol Chapel, which stands about 9 miles to the northeast of the site of the stone. See map, p. In the 19, old parish of Tarves. Bartle or Barthol Chapel occupies the site and preserves the name of an ancient Roman Catholic chapel dedicated to St. Bartholomew, which in pre-Phoenician days was latterly transferred to the jurisdiction of the great monastic abbey of Arbroath in the adjoining county of Forfar. In the register of the Arbroath Monastery are references to this chapel of Bartholomew, also called the Capella de Fuchel, or Furchel, dating back to between II 89 and AD. II 99, referring to its transfer to the monks of Arbroath and Gt. 1. For these historical details regarding Barthol Chapel I am indebted the kindness of the Reverend A. R. Sutter, minister of Barthol Chapel Parish. To the present parish of that name was constituted in 1874 at the opening of a memorial church at Barthol by Lord Aberdeen, whose residence is at 81. 82. Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. It appears to have been regarded at the Vatican as of some historical importance, if the report is to be trusted, which says, tradition has it that a certain nobleman heard at the Vatican prayers offered up for the restoration, amongst a list of others, of St. Bartholomew's Chapel in Tarves, now Barthol Chapel Parish. 1. Bartle Fair, one of the oldest in the district, is held annually at Barthol Chapel, on the last Wednesday of August, that is a date corresponding to St. Bartholomew's Day, the August 24th in the Romish calendar. It is an old-time fair, where tubs, spoons, fir lights, torches, sheep, etc., were sold. Now it is chiefly confined to horses. The change of the old traditional name, Part Olon by the monks into Barthol and St. Bartholomew is easily explicable from the known facts in the early history of the Christian Church, where the Romish priests' people were in the habit of incorporating the pre-Christian heroes of the latter into their lists of Christian saints. That change of the name, indeed, had already been made by Nennius and Geoffrey in their later translations of the British Chronicles, wherein they call Part Olon of the Irish Chronicles Partoloam, Partholomus, and Bartholomews. With reference to this alteration of the name it is interesting to note that the Apostle Bartholomew, or properly Bartholomeus, as his name is written in the Greek text of the New Testament, bears an Aryan and not a Hebrew name, which contains the element Barat or Briton, conjoined also with the Aryan affix which is a recognized oloma. Haddon House, not far distant. The Arbroath Register records that between 1199 and 1207 Matthew, Bishop of Aberdeen, confirmed the grant which had been to the monks of Arbroath, of the Kirk of Tarves made, with the Capella de Fuchel, which is shown to be identical with Barthol Chapel. And other records go on till 1247. One from Mr. Sutter's notes. £2 a sect 13. 4 ch 3. 12. Is SS. Although his name noted by S.B. Gould, not Hebrew, it is assumed to be so, and is conjectured by Hebrew scholars to mean usually the Hebrew bar equals son and ta/mai of Talma, and analogous to Peter's title of Bar Jonah, although the latter is never used by itself. As to the theory that Bartholomew is identical with Nathaniel, the Ensel Biblica, 489, says it is a mere conjecture. St. Bartholomew, an Arian Phoenician 83. It variant of Olon. He appears to have been a Gentile, and according to St. Jerome was the only one of the 12 apostles who was of noble birth, and author of a Gospel of Bartholomew, latterly deemed heretical. One possibly because of the inclusion of some Arian sun worship. He is specially mentioned in connection with Philip, who also, like Bartholomew and Andrew, bore a Gentile and non-Hebrew name, and, according to the Roman martyrology, was a native of Persia, and the traditional apostle for the shores of the Black Sea, Armenia, Phrygia, and Lycaonias, that is, as we have seen, in the Berat regions, on the border of Cilicia. Thus seems probable that his proper name was or Partoloni. And, curiously, the traditional place of St. Bartholomew's martyrdom was Albina, which is usually identified with Albina, on the shore of the Caspian, north of the Caucasus, the modem Derbend and Gt Kinit, however. Be possible that the old Roman monks, in naming their chapel at Barthol in the Garioch influenced by this Albina tradition, in the belief that it might be Alban, the ancient name for Britain. To which part of the reputed bodily relics of Saint Bartholomew had come. The miraculous distribution of the bodily relics of St. Bartholomew followed to some extent the sea route followed by Part Olon. From Asia Minor the relics were believed to have sailed miraculously, by themselves, along the Aegean, and reached, amongst other places, Sicily, Lipari, Spain, Toledo. And an arm reached Canterbury in Alban, Britannia. At Canterbury, which performed many miracles, appears to have been one of the main attractions for the pilgrims to that shrine, and gave its name to St. Bartholomew's Hospital in the High Street at Canterbury, erected or rebuilt, by Thomas Becket, about as an hostel ADIISO, for the poor Christian pilgrims of Britain in this forgotten era. Iz and C. Klopp, Biblica, 489. B.L.S. 253. S. for Canterbury, IB, 258F. Present. Deriving its name from the Anglo-Saxon title of or Burg of the Men of Kent or Kent, was called by Duerwern, which bears some resemblance to the Tarves. Diverobirig the Britons of the Barthol Chapel. 84 Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. In of Saint Bartholomew worship. The Arian saint also gave his name to Bartholomew Fair, in Smithfield, London, which was the principal fair in England in the Middle Ages, from II33 onwards, for cloth, pewter, leather and cattle and for miracle plays, and St. Bartholomew's Priory on this site, and later St. Bartholomew's Hospital, was given the N. Rites of sanctuary by Edward, perhaps the reason for Barthol Chapel, as well as St. Bartholomew's Day and Fair in the rest of Britain, falling into oblivion in the Roman Church. Was the ignominy attaching to papacy through the infamous massacre on that day of the Huguenot Protestants Paris in 1572. Another medieval local Bartholomew of repute is found in the vicinity of the Newton Stone at Leslie on the Gaddy River to the east of Mt Benechie, see map, p19. The founder of the Leslie family and Earl of Garioch is called Bartolf in a charter of the 12th century, and is reputed to have been a Saxon or Hungarian notable who came over with the suite of the family of Queen Margaret, sister of Edgar Atheling and spouse of Malcolm Kenmore. Or he may have been one of the many Anglo-Saxon refugees who were driven to Scotland by the Norman conquest of England. It seems possible that this Bartolf or Bartholomew, as he is also called, and who became the Earl of Garioch who founded the House of Leslie, or Les Ellen, as this name was spelt in the old charters, may originally have borne this latter name as his real surname S. La Salle and La Salle being Germano-French names, and that he may have adopted, with his Garioch title, the old traditional name of Part Olon or Bartholomew, still clinging to that locality. The fact that the old Barthol Chapel was outside Garioch proper, and was not finally transferred to the Arbroath. It was the custom formerly in Brittany, or Little Britain, for patients to spend the night before St. Bartholomew's Day cataleptic dancing in the parish church, an infallible cure for fits. The custom is said not to be altogether extinguished in Brittany at the present day. B.L.S. 260. This custom of dancing with reference to fits suggests to me that St. Vitus dance possibly derives its name from the pagan Saint Bert or Brit or PRWT, in which the R has dropped out, as in Biddy for Bridget, especially as there is no reference to dancing or fits in connection with the youthful martyr Saint Vitus in Gould's Life of the latter. WAH, 36. Brood title of Kings of Picts 85 Diocese until II89 presumes that it was in existence before Bartolf's time. The brood title, also, of so many of the ancient historical kings of the Picts in Scotland, whose chief stronghold in the north of Scotland at the dawn of literary Scottish history in the 6th century was Aberdeenshire. AD to be clearly derived from this Pnot or with variant Brut, title of this early Phoenician. Part Olon, King of the Scots of our monument. Pray. 521, d. When modem native Scottish history opens in the pages of Adamnan, the disciple and biographer of the Irish Scot missionary Prince Columba, b. 597, 1 we AD. Learn that Columba, in his mission for the conversion of the pagan Picts of Scotland, visited, in 556, the king of the AD Picts named Bruid. This king, whose name is also significantly spelt Brud and Brides, and Latinized into Brudius, parallel with Brutus, resided in his fortress at Inverness, now called Craigfadraig. On the Moray Firth, to which leads the old trunk road from Aberdeen, which passes the site of the Newton in a friendly manner, he invited him to a trial of skill against his Druid high priest. And on Columba defeating the Druid by his superior magic, King Brud embraced Christianity and was with many of his subjects baptized by Columba, an event which, it should be noted, happened 40 years before the arrival of St. Augustine in Britain to convert the English to Christianity. He also granted Columba permission to open a missionary station and build a monastery at Deer, about 20 miles to the northeast of this stone. And he also confirmed Columba in his possession of the Island of Iona. This latter incident indicates that King Brud or Brud was king of the whole of Scotland and the Isles, and he held the Prince of Orkney hostage. Significantly also, this kingly title of Brud or Brud, also spelt bride, bride, bread and breath, was used by the great majority of this King Brud's predecessors in the king lists of the Picts, as preserved in the Colbertine 1 ALR, 149F. 2 CSCP, 436. H. 86 Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots Ms. Codex. This list, which is substantially identical with the versions of the same in the Irish books of Ballymote and Lecan, extends from the first eponymous king of the Picts in Scotland, called Cruithne, to Bred, the last king of the Picts, about 834 AD. This name of Cruithne for the first king of the Picts in Scotland is held by Celtic scholars to be the Pictish form of spelling if Pruithne or Briton, on their theory that the Picts and Celts or Gaels substituted k for p in their spelling of names, and also substituted b for p in such names, though it may be observed that Celtic scholars do not explain why the Picts and Gaels who had their alphabet do not use it in spelling this name, but employ a c instead. If Cruithne, however, really represents Pruithne, as believed, then the first king of the Picts in Scotland bore a with if Prwt, the erector of the Newton stone monument, and thus presumably was identical with him. This if Cruithne, or Pruithne, is stated to be the if son of Singe, and this is expanded by the Irish book versions above cited into Singe, son of Luctai, son of Parthi or Pruithallan. 2. This last statement is interesting and important as connecting Cruithne traditionally with Part Olon, a name which we have seen was only a family title, his personal name being Etar. But this making him to be the third descendant from Part Olin is presumably a gloss by later Irish scribes to suit the Irish tradition that Part Olin settled in Ireland and died there, and that it was the third generation who migrated to Scotland. Cruithne, or if Pruithne, is followed in the Pictish king list by the names of if 7 sons who are each supposed to have reigned consecutively after their father. But, as the Irish versions state, these names are those of the 7 divisions or provinces of medieval Scotland, beginning 1. The Colbertine Ms is a 14th century Latin copy made out of an earlier Old Gaelic or Irish original written in the 10th century York AD, and is now in the Imperial Library, Paris, No. 4126, it contains well-known Pictish chronicle, of which the best published edition though with translation is by W. F. Skene, SCP, where a facsimile of the most important part of the Ms. is given. SCP, 23 and 24. It Bruid title of Kings of Picts 87 with it Fib or Fife, and including it Fort Wren or Perth, it and got or it Caith in the Irish versions, which is Caithness. The Irish versions further state that all the 7 divisions of North Alban were under the paramount rule of Onbeacon, son of Caith. Ngt this prominence given to Caith, which, we shall see, is the tribal title at Catti, and his son indicates that the succession in Scotland passed from son to son, from the first King Pruthne, as Celtic scholars explain it Cruthne, who appears to be in the PRWT, or part Olon, of the Newton stone, and that other 4 kings named with Onbeacon, after the 7 provinces, were probably names in the contemporary branch dynasty in Ireland. The succession also in the case at least of the last 2 of these 4 kings, namely Gest and Wergest clearly from son to son, as we shall see that the prefix Wer means it son of. This fact is of great significance, as showing that these early kings of the Picts succeeded in the paternal line and not in the maternal line, and were therefore presumably Aryan and not themselves Picts, which latter were their matrilinear succession, which, we shall see, was a vestige of the primitive matriarchist promiscuity of the Picts. After these preliminary kings there now follows an unbroken line of 29 kings of the Picts, each bearing the title of Brud or Brud, and they are stated to have ruled jointly over both Hibernia and North Alban, and Gt of Brud or Brud kings is as follows, and it will be noted that some of the names are essentially Aryan Veith version in the Irish list, when differing the Colbertine Ms. is added within brackets. Brud Bont 6. Brud Gant I8. Brud or Brud Pant, B7. Brud or Gant 2. Pant Brud Guths, Nuth, 3. Brud or Pant, Dur Pont, 9. Brud or Guth, Durnuth, IQ. Brud or 4. Brud Leo Brud Faker. 5 Brud or Leo, Julio, Feth, ISCPXXII, 4 and 24. Thus Leo, and Gant equals 2 Colbertine Ms ed.s.c.p, 23. Nut or Knut, Guth equals 3 IB, 4 and 24 and so on. The Colbertine Ms reads here IO, Goth. CACN, 137. 6 pounds Guth. And Ergith, 137, and Skeens I copy facsimile be so read. Also May. 88 Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots 11. Brudur, Faker, Dur, 20. Brudgart Fagir, 21. Brudurgart 12. Brudcal 22. Brudsynod, Sind, 13. Brudurcal 23. Brudur Synod, Dur Sind. 14 Brudquit. Sint, 24. Brud UIP is. Brudur Quit, Dur Sint, 25. Brudur UIP 16. Brud FET 26. Brudgrid Brudur FET Brudur Grid 17. 2718. Brud RU 28. Brudmund, Muin. 19 Brud or Brud URU. Arrow, 29. Brudur Mimed, Dur Muin. And in scanning this king list it is seen that Brud or Brud is clearly used as a title, prefixed to the proper personal name of each king. Indeed, the Irish text says, was the name of each man of them, and of the divisions of the other men of the tribe, Cruthne, and this latter statement is important, as presumably meaning that the if other Cruthne men also bore this title of Brud or Briton. The Celtic UA it is also noteworthy that all of the names after the first are in pairs, in which the second is formed by first surname repeated with the prefix ur. This ur presumably represents a descendant or son for. And, what is of great importance is that this practice is precisely paralleled in the Sanskrit and Pali king lists of the Aryan Bharat kings. UPA which often prefix or if son of 5 to the name of a king bearing the same name as his father. This fact now appears AP up to disclose the Aryan source of the Cymric prefix or in personal names, such as AP John or Up John, with the meaning of if son of John. And it also proves that at least half, if not the whole, of these Brud kings were, like the first on the list, succeeded by their sons, i.e., by patrilinear succession. Similarly, amongst the historical kings of the patron Brud, or Brud or if Brige, 1 ACN, 37, and Skeens I copy also may be so read. Pound 137. C. Skeens translation OPCIT 26. The Irish text of the books of Ballymote and Lecan is Brud Adberthia Friday Gach Fur Dib, Ronda Na Fear Ale, Ro Gabzadar Iarc. Utest Ilyabre Bite Na Kruthniak. 4 CPCAN, 360. Up in Sanskrit and Pali equals below. Under, and when prefixed to personal names, as it often is, means son CPMSD, 194. Brud Kings and Part Olan 89 who is surnamed son of Makam, or Tu Miikon or Tu Miiko, of 556 title are the following bearers of this A.D1 Brud. Brud or Breedii, 2 son of Foth or Wid, 640 AD Brud or Breedii, son of Billy or Bile, 674 to 693 AD, contemporary with and mentioned by Adamnan. Brud or Breedii, son of Darrelay, 699 AD. Brud or Breedy or Brett, son of Wergist or Tenagus, 761 AD. Brett or Brud, son of Ferrat or Fatal, the last king of the Picts, 842 A.D.3. Now, it is significant to find that, although these Brud or Bride, were kings of the Picts, a race which, we shall see, were non-Aryan and pre-Briton Aborigines, they themselves appear to have been not Picts in race but Britons or Briton Scots, i.e. Aryans. The second of these later Bruds, or was the son of the Scot king Billy or Bile, that is a namesake of the Phoenician sun god Bil or Bel of our inscription, who is called king of Strathclyde and whose dun or fort was Dunbarton or the fort of the Bartons, i.e. Britons or Britons on the Clyde. His son Brud or Breedii is called king of Fort Wren or Perth, for indicating his residence there. He had, besides, a kinsman who was also king and called King Brud, who latterly assisted in the defence of Dunbarton against 5 Bile. Or this presumes that the people whom Partolin the Scot ruled from the Don Valley in the 4th century were also BC Picts, and that these later kings, bearing the title of Bruds, and claiming descent from Pruthni, were of 76. This and was he was born 504. Maelchon was slain in and died 583. Another king Bruadi son of Edquaison, Kincardine, in 752 AD, according to A.D. Battle the Annals of Tyrannus. And in the same year son of Bile Tadar and king of Alclyde, or Dunbarton, died, S.C.P. King Bile, named after the sun god Bil, of Dunbarton died 722, succeeded by his son 24. These variant spellings of the name Brud or Brud in the Kolb and Irish books CSCP 3 and 28, etc., also register oft Priory Ms of St. Andrews. Fall 46 to -49 in 145, etc. See foregoing ACN also ACN 139 to 147. This last king of the Picts was succeeded in 843 by Kynad son of Alpin or Kenneth MacAlpin, whose son was Constantine. SCP. 6. SALR 149. Etc. Go Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. His kindred, if not remote lineal descendants. And that the confederacy between the Picts and the Scots, of which we hear so much in the history textbooks, was which the Scots were the rulers and leaders in battle, and the Picts the subjects whom they had civilized, more or less. This relationship appears to the 9th century when the Scot A.D. kings of the Picts were still using a dialectic form of the old ruling Aryan catty title of Barat, like King of Arnútan Olohuni or Part Olan, King of the Scots, who, I find, also presumably bore the alternative title of Cathlon, as the first traditional king of the Picts, see Appendix 2. And, as a fact, the Don Valley was an especial abode of the Picts in prehistoric times. The remains of their subterranean dwellings are especially one numerous there. This now brings us face to face with the much vexed and hitherto unsolved question: who were the Picts? This question, however, can be better tackled after we have examined through our new lights the traces of whom part Olon found in occupation of Ireland, which was also a land of the Picts. JL1 writing on Picts earth houses. They exist in many places in Britain. History of Scotland, I. 98, but chiefly they concentrate, says Scotland, themselves near Glenkindie and Kildrumany on the upper reaches of the Rivy Don in Aberdeenshire. There they may be found so thickly strewn as to form subterranean villages or even towns. The fields are honeycombed with them. And C.P.J. Stewart on Subterranean Habitations Scotica, 1822, 2, 53-8.